morning, I'm Cilliers Brink and welcome to the Inside Track. Today, President Cyril Ramaphosa will make an historic appearance before the Zondo Commission, where we hope he will tell South Africa about his own role in state capture. Ramaphosa was, after all, the head of the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee under President Zuma. It's now clear that the ANC's Cadre deployment policy is at the heart of state capture. But can we stop cadre deployment? We explore all of this and more. But first, we have a look at the week in headlines.
The local government elections here in the country will take place on the 27th of October.
The Independent Electoral Commission says it will soon embark on a national voter registration campaign to facilitate and encourage participation.
The message is very, very clearly that if we want freedom, we've got to fight for it every single day. It's not something that's guaranteed. It's not something that's there forever. We've got to, as citizens, fight for that freedom.
It's time for a DA majority in the Bay, and it's time for change in South Africa.
Embattled state arms manufacturer Denel has struggled to pay its workers due to a liquidity crisis.
It received a 1.8 billion rand bailout from the government at the end of August after battling to pay salaries and suppliers.
Amazon has announced that it will establish its South African headquarters in Cape Town. This is a project that has the potential to create up to 19,000 jobs, more than 5,000 during the construction phase alone.
South African Netflix documentary My Octopus Teacher has won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature at the 93rd Academy Awards ceremony in Los Angeles.
This week in the headlines, the DA celebrates Freedom Day in Nelson Mandela Bay. South Africa's local government elections are confirmed for Wednesday, 27 October, and new BEE regulations for internet providers threaten investment. How important is fast, affordable internet to you? Well, the country's broadcasting regulator, ICASA, has published regulations that will force internet providers to have 30% black ownership and level 4 BEE status in order to operate within South Africa. These regulations will repel investment, the same investment needed to create jobs and drive down data prices. We've already seen what BEE codes have done to sectors like mining, where thousands of jobs have been lost in the past decade. Don't expect the same policy to deliver a different outcome. Consider how Elon Musk's company, Starlink, is likely to respond to the demand that before being able to invest in the country, they must first change their owners. Starlink has said that it wants to roll out internet access to the most remote parts of South Africa. Investment of this kind could help young people living in rural areas bridge the digital divide, unlocking opportunities for people in places where government has failed. That's real empowerment. But instead of welcoming foreign investors like Starlink, ICASA wants to slam the door in their face. In fact, small owner-operated companies might even be driven out of business. This is called empowerment policy, but it achieves the exact opposite of empowerment. It opens a small door to a well-connected elite, but shuts out the majority of the South African people. Yet another state-owned enterprise is going bust. This time, Denel, the state-owned armaments company, is running short of cash thanks to gross mismanagement, and it won't be able to pay their employees the salaries for April. Denel has been embroiled in allegations of state capture and, like many other state-owned entities, has suffered years of mismanagement. Now the entity is broke. To avoid further loss to the taxpayer, the DA has called for Denel to be placed in business rescue. With a growing list of state-owned entities that are effectively zombie enterprises, Eskom and SAA, the country simply cannot afford another massive government bailout. It's official. Local government elections have been confirmed for 27 October of this year. Please save the date. While other political parties have called for this year's election to be postponed, the DA has pushed for voting to continue according to the constitutional timeline. Free, fair and regular elections are the bedrock of our constitutional democracy, and the DA is delighted that South Africans will get the opportunity to exercise their hard-won right to vote later this year. But in order to vote, you must first be registered where you live. Please visit check.da.org.za to check your registration status. This election is a crucial opportunity for change, maybe the most important yet. Last week, the city of Cape Town announced the exciting news that Amazon will be establishing its South African headquarters in the mother city. The project is set to create 19,000 jobs and inject 4 billion rand into the economy. Cape Town is run by the DA. It has been for many years, and it is well run. That's why companies invest in Cape Town. The Amazon investment is an example of how good government improves the lives of ordinary people. Well done, Cape Town. Yesterday, the DA celebrated Freedom Day in Nelson Mandela Bay. It's been 27 years since South Africa's first free and fair elections, and while many people simply enjoyed a day of rest and recreation, many also reflected on where the country is going. The DA highlighted this continued struggle for economic freedom for millions of South Africans. We must protect our hard-won freedom against its enemies: greed, hatred, and unaccountable leadership. As the DA, we will continue to build an open opportunity society for all. And finally, news from Hollywood. South Africa's first ever Netflix documentary, My Octopus Teacher, has won the Oscar for the Best Documentary Film. The film is storytelling at its best, introducing the great African sea forest to the world. Like the rest of the country, the DA is brimming with pride. We congratulate Pippa Ehrlich and her team on this outstanding performance. In the spotlight this week, Cyril Ramaphosa is set to make an historic appearance before the Zondo Commission to account for his own role in enabling state capture. Let's take a look at the story in the spotlight.
Now, there have been growing calls for the African National Congress to be transparent on its cadre deployment policy. The party is alleged to have aided state capture, including the deployment of ANC loyalists to head state-owned entities who later facilitated their looting.
President Cyril Ramaphosa will be appearing before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry.
He was deputy president of the ANC and of the country during much of the state capture period, or all of it, in fact.
ANC National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe defended the governing party's deployment policy amid calls for it to be scrapped.
Some of the people deployed are at the center of alleged corruption.
Judge Zondo has already speculated that cadre deployment may have provided fertile ground for state capture.
The Democratic Alliance has received confirmation now of receipt from the Zondo Commission of a series of questions directed at President Cyril Ramaphosa pertaining to his role as the chairperson of the ANC's Cadre Deployment Committee.
Cadre deployment was a program to destroy the proper distinction between party and state, and that it would strike at the very heart of our democracy. The ANC ignored the warnings because it chose cadres over country, and now the worst has indeed come to pass.
Now, after 2.5 years of testimony, this is the biggest takeaway from the Zondo Commission: that the ANC's policy of cadre deployment is the fundamental cause of state capture and corruption in this country. So what exactly is cadre deployment? It's a system that reserves powerful positions in the civil service, which are supposed to be staffed by skilled, non-political professionals, for ANC members who have proven their loyalty to the party instead of the country. It's one thing for politicians to stand for parliament or as a local councillor. It is quite something else for politicians to be appointed in jobs that require political impartiality and specialized non-political skills. Think of the difference between your local councillor and the head of SARS. Clearly, there are different skill sets involved here. Cadre deployment robs the public service of desperately needed skills because it locks out highly professional, skilled people who are not members of the ANC from key positions. But cadre deployment has another function. It unlocks opportunities for corruption and state capture. Loyal ANC members are appointed under the system and then expected to return the favor using the sham of BEE to funnel tenders back to the pockets of the ANC. It's a vicious cycle, and it's destroying opportunities to lift people out of poverty. Money meant for services are funneled into corrupt tenders for the elite, while infrastructure collapses under the weight of overpaid managers who often lack the skills to do the job. Today, Cyril Ramaphosa has been called before the Zondo Commission to testify to his central role as one of the architects of this corrupt system. a system that counts Jacob Zuma as its commander-in-chief. Indeed, he has become a symbol of the ANC's total unwillingness to take action to stop corruption. To discuss all of this and more, we are joined in studio by the DA's Shadow Minister in the Presidency, Solly Malatsi, as well as the Director of Accountability Now, Advocate Paul Hoffman. Later we'll cross to the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, who is at the Zondo Commission today. Gentlemen, before we get stuck into this discussion, most or many South Africans don't know what cadre deployment is. So we caught up with the DA's Leon Schreiber earlier this week to talk about this process and a bill he has tabled to end cadre deployment for good. Have a look at this.
South Africans look around us every day and we wonder about why our lights go off so regularly. We wonder about why there's less and less water coming out of the taps. We wonder about why there are potholes in the roads that are just getting bigger rather than being fixed. Behind all of this, there's a system called cadre deployment. It is a system that deliberately robs you of service delivery. It deliberately ensures that the people who can fix your roads, who can provide you with electricity, who can make sure that there's running water, are not appointed to critical positions where that would be their job, but instead those positions are filled with ANC cadres, members of the ANC, people who are loyal to the ANC and who are committed to keeping that party in power at all costs and making sure that money that's meant to serve you is diverted to serve the ANC. That's what we need to bring an end to. The testimony we've seen in front of the Zondo Commission has opened an historic window of opportunity for South Africa to do the one most critical thing we can do to fix our state, and that is to end cadre deployment. The DA has already introduced the End Cadre Deployment Bill in Parliament, which will make sure that our public service is staffed by competent officials who are appointed on the basis of merit and on the basis of their skills, rather than on the basis of their political loyalties to the ANC. It will therefore outlaw cadre deployment. It will outlaw the very thing that caused our state to become captured and replace it with an independent public service, where when you go to receive service from the state in any form whatsoever, whether that's fixing your potholes in your road or renewing your driver's license, you will know that you are being served by the best person who applied for that job, who was appointed because they have the skills to do their job and nothing else.
So, Solly Malatsi, we have an idea of the definition of cadre deployment now. But you and I have heard ANC members of Parliament make the argument that cadre deployment is the most natural thing in the world, because any government needs people it can trust to be deployed into positions to make sure that those officials implement the program of the governing party and believe in it. What is your response to that?
Well, from the onset, it's important to distinguish what should the right appointment be in the public service. It must be a qualified individual, a competent individual with a record of delivery. What cadre deployment seeks to do and what the ANC seeks to achieve with cadre deployment is to identify the most strategic, the most influential and the most powerful positions in the public service or in state-owned enterprises and government departments and appoint individuals who it knows would be there for one single thing, which is to advance the causes of the ANC. Not of the South African government, not of the South African public, but to make sure that their daily obsession becomes advancing and protecting the interest of the ANC, even when they so clash with the interest of the country. And that's what cadre deployments, in a nutshell, seeks to do. And the worst part about it is it overshadows the one essential ingredient, that these individuals should be qualified individuals in those roles. And they should be politically neutral in order for them to serve the country well, because in order for a public service system to work, it needs competent, politically neutral individuals who will be there to see beyond factional interest in a political party or to see beyond party interest, because those will always be at conflict with what are the interests of the country in any civil service.
So it collapses this wall between party and state, so that the government of the day attaches itself to the apparatus of the state permanently. You're making elections irrelevant.
It muddies the waters completely. And in fact, it exists to do that, so that those who are in power, being the politicians in charge as the executive authorities, can nilly-willy impose their wishes without a bulwark that will be able to test their wishes or instructions against what is required in terms of the South African law and the Public Service Act.
Advocate Paul Hoffman, turning to you, you've written a great deal about cadre deployment.
Too much.
Too much. And the question that many people ask is, how do we know about cadre deployment? What's the source of our knowledge? Is it speculation? Is it rumors? Where does cadre deployment come from? And at what point does it clash with the Constitution?
Yes, I think that in a broad discussion about cadre deployment, you need to distinguish cadre deployment into political positions. Anybody from the president through the cabinet, into parliament, into the province, into the local government, political positions, elected people, can be cadres. There's not a problem with that.
So Brian Molefe would have been better off as an ANC MP as the head of Eskom?
Absolutely. And that is because we respect freedom of association and the rights to organise politically. However, when it comes to state-owned enterprise employees and to the public administration, we have a constitution that gets in the way of cadre deployment, and the practice of using Luthuli House cadre deployment committees at national, provincial and local level to recommend, is what they say, but I've yet to see a recommendation that doesn't actually happen, the favourite of Luthuli House to fill a position that is vacant in the public administration. When it comes to senior public servants such as Directors General and Deputy Directors General, Gwedi Montashi is on record in January 2010 as saying that serving at the behest of the minister, who hires and fires at will, is a recipe for disaster. Nothing has been done to change the recipe, and the disaster has occurred. And the disaster is now called state capture, because what has happened is that the bright line between party and state has been blurred by the ANC, and everybody who is in a position in the public administration as a consequence of the activities of ANC cadre deployment committees is there illegally and is in fact undermining the implementation of the constitutional project in South Africa, because they are serving the ANC instead of serving the people of South Africa.
So you're saying we can't just blame state capture on the Guptas and on Zuma. It's actually a consequence of policy of the governing party.
Absolutely. The Guptas wouldn't have stood a snowball's hope in hell if they had to deal with public servants who placed their loyalty in the Constitution and to serve the people of South Africa, rather than loyally serving the agenda of the ANC itself.
Solly, Advocate Hoffman referred to these deployment committees. And that's an interesting point, because many people, when they talk about state capture, corruption, what has gone wrong, associate all of that with the Zuma presidency. Yeah. But the interesting thing is that President Ramaphosa, in his previous life as deputy to Zuma, was in fact the chairman of the National Cadre Deployment Committee of the ANC. So it would seem he's got a lot to answer for as one of the architects of this corrupt system.
Absolutely. The key thing, and Advocate Hoffman mentions it, is that cadre deployment wasn't a Zuma policy. It is an ANC policy, and state capture is born out of that, because what it has done is cadre deployment created an enabling environment to have cadres in these strategic positions in government, because the ANC, let's remember, it wanted absolute control of all levels of the state. So the best way for them to do that was to plant these cadres in there to advance the interest of the ANC. And over time, they become vulnerable to other influences, and the Guptas became part of that through their relationship with President Jacob Zuma. But the interesting point you make is that the deputy president of the ANC is always the head of the deployment committee of the ANC at a national level. And President Ramaphosa was, throughout President Jacob Zuma's tenure as president, the head of that deployment committee that deals with, the approval or the recommendation of all director generals, all CEOs of of state-owned enterprises. So there is no single appointment at a state-owned enterprise or of a director general that happened throughout President Ramaphosa's 10-year or 9-year tenure as deputy president that he couldn't have known about it, and more importantly, that he couldn't have voiced his support for it, because we know that at national level, it is the deployment committee that he led that approved those appointments. Provincial ANC structures also have a duplicate of their deployment committees, but we know that where the big cash was, and this was done specifically so that state resources can be used to aid the ANC in their campaigning or in their fundraising, was that they were done with President Ramaphosa as a leading
and at the
figure
center of that committee, even if he didn't actively support it, he was surely in a position to stop some of these deployment decisions.
He couldn't have been shocked, as he claims to be perpetually in shock about the number of these appointments. And that knowledge is important when the president makes his evidence today, or his appearance at the commission, because if truth be told, we know that by virtue of being the head of that deployment committee, the information couldn't have been new to him, because there are deliberations, there are considerations that are done on where to best place the CEO of Transnet, whoever the individual might be, who would be sympathetic to the cause of the ANC at that particular time. So what would be important is that the president has been mesmerizing the whole country ever since he came into the presidency about a new way of doing things. And part of that requires transparency, it requires honesty, and it will be important to observe to which extent will he be honest about his role in today's appearance at the Zondo Commission.
Advocate Hoffman, what does the Constitution say about a political party wanting to get its hands on all of the levers of power? Is there a legal recourse for us against cadre deployment?
What the Constitution says in Section 1 is that the system of governance in South Africa is required to be open, accountable, and responsive to the needs of the people of South Africa in a multi-party system that regards the rule of law as supreme. Now, smoky back rooms at Luthuli House, where proceedings are in camera, in other words, nobody gets to hear about the deliberations of the various cadre deployment committees, do not actually comply with any of the basic criteria for open, accountable, responsive governance. But it gets worse than that. If you go all the way to Section 195 of the Constitution, you will find that the principles and values that inform the public administration in South Africa are set out, and one of them is that sound, good human resource management practices and career development practices have to be in place in the public administration, so that the public administration is able to objectively and fairly deliver services to the people of South Africa, not to the politicians of South Africa, and to carry out what are called the lawful policies of the government of the day. Because any policy that is not lawful is inconsistent with the Constitution, and that means that it can be struck down as invalid. Now, this policy of cadre deployment comes from the National Democratic Revolution, which is at the core of a lot of the outdated thinking in the ANC, where hegemonic control of all the levers of power in society is what is sought. And when I say society, I'm not just talking about the public service and the state-owned enterprises as being part of what the ANC is seeking to achieve. That is totally inconsistent with the idea of an open, accountable system of governance in a multi-party system.
Where parties have to contest elections to hold power, not by any right. But has a court of law had anything to say about instances of cadre deployment?
Because cadre deployment happens in secret, it's very difficult to get hold of direct evidence of cadre deployment. And since a case in the Eastern Cape called Mlokoti versus the Amatola District Municipality case, we'll call it the Amatola case. Since that case, the ANC in public has taken the attitude that they don't do cadre deployments, they make a recommendation, and the recommendation is then referred to the appointing body. Now, in the Amatola case, the recommending body was the municipality in the Amatola district, and it wanted a former PAC member who was very highly qualified to become its municipal manager. But the deployment committee for the province of the Eastern Cape said, no, we want our man, and they then put a lesser qualified person into the position, the vacant position of municipal manager in the Amatola district. And unfortunately for the ANC, the ousted preferred candidate, and it was preferred actually by the municipality, got hold of the documentation that showed that cadre deployment had been brought to bear, and he was able to persuade the court that this was illegal and unconstitutional, a breach of the Section 195 that I mentioned, and the judge, rather unusually, invalidated the decision to appoint the cadre and appointed the man who was the best man for the job. Now, Senzo Mchunu is talking about professionalizing the public service, and if he respects and implements that judgment, cadre deployment will die as it should have long ago, because it is inconsistent with the Constitution, but it will die as a consequence of the realization that in the absence of a professional public service and professionally chosen leaders of state-owned enterprises, service delivery does not happen as it should in South Africa. And the obligation of the state to respect, protect, promote and fulfill the rights that are guaranteed to all in the Bill of Rights, that's set out in Section 7 of the Bill of Rights, just doesn't happen because people are looking over their shoulders at the cadre deployment committee to make sure it is happy, instead of looking to the people to make sure that they are happy.
Yeah. So, Solly Malatsi, the DA is obviously hoping that what is happening at the Zondo Commission will help to clear the smoky rooms that Advocate Hoffman speaks about, where the decisions are made where to deploy who. The DA has made submissions to the Zondo Commission. Give us an idea of what we as the DA would like the Zondo Commission to achieve, and what questions should President Ramaphosa in particular need to answer.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the party, through the party leader, John Steenhuisen, made a submission of more than 30 questions to the Zondo Commission, particularly interrogating the role of the current president in terms of his knowledge, his level of involvement in cadre deployment and its manifestation through specific appointments that have been made, you know, in the last 10 years, dating back to when he was the deputy president. But most importantly, to look at a key thing, you know, and Advocate Hoffman mentions it, this whole drive towards the professionalization of the public service requires that competence, requires that the right qualified individuals be prioritized for appointment, regardless of their political affiliation or leaning. And that's a very important thing to instill, protect in the South African public service, which, if it had been right, we would probably not be talking about state capture. But we know that the ANC has the strong push for cadre development to happen, to the extent that even EPWP work opportunities, they are guided by cadre development. I mean, you know, having been an MC in the city of Tshwane, that when the DA administration arrived in the city of Tshwane, the number of ANC branch officials who were appointed in the city of Tshwane to basically do nothing other than ANC work while being on the municipality's payroll. And that is the extent that shows how the ANC is willing to protect its ability to abuse state resources for party gains. And we hope that the Zondo Commission will get the president to the point of revealing the exact motivation for all of this, the instances where he was aware and where he wasn't shocked when the appointments were made, and basically to come with a mechanism that will eventually outlaw the manifestation of cadre development. Because, you know, it is currently a party policy, but it has infiltrated the state and the public service, because it's not like we can say outlaw cadre development and there will be, you know, a constitutional amendment or proclamation that says that this can no longer happen. But it needs to go back into making sure that we prevent the influence of a very small influential group at Lithuli House having its preferences for senior appointments that should be based on qualification and competence in the public service happening.
Yeah. Now, the DA's leader, John Steenhuisen, is at the Zondo Commission today, and we would like to cross to him now to hear what his expectations are of what President Ramaphosa needs to answer there.
It's very important as the official opposition that we get to the heart of the issue of state capture, how it happened, and what President Ramaphosa's role was in it. The President often speaks about 9 wasted years, but he was at the heart of those 9 wasted years. Leader of government business, a member of the ANC, NEC, Deputy President of the ANC, and Jacob Zuma's right-hand man as Deputy President. It is inconceivable that he sat around all these tables and didn't know what was going on with the state capture project. We also know that cadre deployment has been at the heart of enabling state capture to happen, because it was able to put people into key positions based not on their ability to do the job, but on the ability to serve the ANC and the connected cadres. And they have destroyed nearly every single one of our public enterprises in South Africa. Cadre deployment and the cadre deployment project lies at the very heart of the state capture project and what has gone wrong in South Africa. We need to make sure that the President makes a full account about his role. We need to know what he knew, when he knew it, but what he did about it as well. We also know it is a criminal offence in South Africa in terms of the Prevention of Organised Crime and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act to know about corruption, to know about the abuse of state power, and not to report it to the authorities. Everyone has a duty to make those reports. So I think the President's got to come clean today on his role and what he intends to do going forward to prevent this from ever happening again under his watch. Corruption is not a victimless crime. The victims of corruption in South Africa are the 30 million South Africans that live in poverty and without opportunity because it has been stolen by a government that has been obsessed with enriching itself and its connected cadres instead of actually serving the people of South Africa. We have a civil service that is committed to channeling money into the ANC's coffers, into the pockets of connected individuals. That is not a government that serves the people. There are absolute victims in this crime, and it's every time you see a young child who does not have the opportunity of a decent school without pit latrines, they are a victim. The 42% of South Africans who are unemployed, they are a victim. The 30 million people living in poverty, they are a victim. The gender-based violence victims, the women in South Africa who do not have a police service that can actually look after them, are victims. These are the real victims and the face of the state capture project and of the cadre deployment project and of the corruption project that has been presided over by the ANC and which Mr. Ramaphosa was part of for an extended period of time.
So that was DA leader John Steenhuisen, who is at the Zondo Commission today, where President Ramaphosa is set to give his testimony about cadre deployment and corruption in the term that preceded him. Advocate Hoffman, as a parting shot, do you expect the evidence leaders at the Zondo Commission to be tough on the President, or at least to ask him the essential questions that need to be asked, and as highlighted by John Steenhuisen?
Well, as I understand it, questions have been fed to the evidence leaders by the DA, and if they are pertinent questions, then the evidence leaders, as objective professionals, ought to put those questions. If we look at the way that the chairman of the ANC, Gwedi Mantashe, went through his paces with Advocate Alec Freund recently, I think it was last week or the week before.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago. He was not asked sweetheart questions. He was interrogated, as he should be, about the practice of cadre deployment. He came up with some rather novel ideas that have never enjoyed currency previously. But at the end of the day, he is the man who in 2010 said, this cadre deployment story is a recipe for disaster in the senior ranks of the public service. And the cadre deployment was not altered. And the consequence of that was that it was possible for people like Tom Yoyani in your intro, the SARS leader. They repurposed the state for the purpose of making sure that the ANC never participates in a fair election in South Africa. The DA raised funds by taking it from the state. You wouldn't dream of it. No other political party does it. ANC feels free to do it all the time, in every way. Think of the arms deal. Andrew Feinstein has told us, and he was an ANC MP, that the 1999 election campaign of the ANC was funded by commissions, we call them bribes, that were taken by ANC-connected people and paid by those who were very grateful to get the billions of rands out of the contracts. Look at the Hitachi Power Africa deal that Chancellor House, which is the ANC's investment vehicle, did with Hitachi in order to supply boilers to Kusile and Madupi. Billions of rands were made out of that. No other political party has the entree that was possible there because the chairman of Eskom, the chairman of the procurement committee at Eskom, and the chairman of fundraising at Lutuli House all happened to be the same person, sitting with several hats on in the negotiations that led to that. You cannot say that there has been a fair election in South Africa since 1994 for the simple reason that the ANC has felt free to steal from the public purse in order to fund its election campaigns.
That's quite something to say. Solly, what's your view on that?
Look, I think what is very clear is that every manifestation of cadre deployment has been orchestrated so that the ANC is the biggest beneficiary. So even state capture, the biggest beneficiary of state capture is the ANC and its cadres. If you look at the testimony of the ex-wife of the Minister of Public Enterprises, it shows you the extent to which individual ANC leaders benefited or extrapolated benefits from state capture. And you can imagine 5 million rand weddings.
Sponsored wedding.
And again, Paul mentions a very particular important thing. When you look at the ANC's process of fundraising, you go to their national elective conferences where tables at fundraisers, were raised, even with state-owned enterprises buying tables in there, so that they bring the leaders of those state-owned enterprises much more closer and solidify the relationship with the ANC. But most importantly, in going to your initial remarks about whether the evidence leaders will be very tough on the president, I think the expectation is that they have to fulfill their professional obligations by maintaining the level of professionalism that they have consistently showed. It will also be revealing what the president's demeanor to those questioning is, because as the number one citizen in the country, he needs to show respect to the establishment of the commission, the process of the commission, and what it seeks to achieve. Because the commission, as it was established, speaks to what he hypothetically came into office advocating: a new way of doing things, accountability, professionalism, fighting corruption. So if he's very reticent in his responses, it will speak volumes about his commitment to that. And most importantly, the one thing that the president needs to do is to speak openly, because the public will be able to judge. We'll be able to judge based on what we know of his long history in the ANC, based on what we know of the duration that he has spent in these powerful positions that we're able to oversee, adopt, and even make recommendations about who's appointed. Because if you also look at the high rate of turnover of director generals in the state, it is too high. If you look at the number of cadres who get recycled from being a municipal manager in a municipality in Limpopo to resurfacing as a director general, or even resurfacing as a CEO of a state-owned enterprises, it shows to you that why do this select group of individuals always find these lucrative appointments that are so linked to the ANC? It is because their fundamental role is to maximize benefits to the African National Congress.
Well, Solly, you and Advocate Hoffman sound quite optimistic about the potential of the Zondo Commission to come to the heart of this issue. What can ordinary people do to help you and to help the DA fight cadre deployment and to make sure that these horrible consequences aren't just left, that we do something about it?
Look, I think our optimism is based on the conduct of the evidence leaders.
And we need some optimism in South Africa.
Absolutely.
Right? We need some.
We do need that. But I think what the public can do is, more than being daily whistleblowers, the DA has the End Cadre Deployment Bill, which my colleague Leon Schreiber has been advocating. They can go on the DA's website to make submissions in there so that we continue the fight. This is not a once-off fight. It requires us to be persistent, to be vigilant until we have removed the influence of cadre deployment in our public service.
Thanks very much, Paul Hoffman and Solly Malatsi, for joining us on the Inside Track. The question now is, will President Ramaphosa speak to the issue of cadre deployment, what he knew about it, what he did about it, or will he skirt the issue? We'll be back straight after this. This week in DA-led towns and cities across the country, South Africa's top 5 municipalities are all run by, yes, you guessed it, the DA. And that's according to Ratings Africa and their Municipal Financial Sustainability Index. Moving to the capital city, the DA-led Tshwane is investing in the expansion of early childhood development centers and the rollout of a food bank to assist vulnerable residents. And since the DA took back control of Nelson Mandela Bay less than 6 months ago, more than 5,000 potholes have been fixed. On to this week's DA at Work. We are joined by JP Smith, the DA-led Cape Town's mayoral committee member for safety and security, to chat to us about fire management in the wake of last week's devastating fire. JP Smith, welcome to the Inside Track. We know that these fires in Cape Town caused immense devastation, and many people were affected, people were displaced. Tell us, how did Cape Town and your emergency services respond so quickly and, it seems, get the situation under control in relatively good time?
So I think that this all started at Sunday around 9:15 when the first plumes of smoke was there. The Premier said he was out cycling and saw that first plume. So from that point onwards, fire managed to get the 3 choppers airborne very quickly. By the time I arrived at the fire, they were cycling through in rapid succession, water bombing the facilities at UCT already. Of course, a big part of the challenge with this fire was that on the second day, the wind was really potent, gusting upwards of 45 kilometers an hour, and even the military choppers couldn't fly. So that grounded the choppers. I mean, if you hear the story of big fires in Cape Town, it's almost always the story of wind. If there's a big fire, it's because it's wind-driven. At the height of it, we had around 26 firefighters on scene, 4 aerial appliances, and around 250 City of Cape Town firefighters, in addition to the working on fire staff, who do brilliant work, the Sandboxes contractor and the volunteer wildfire services, extraordinary volunteers, and a slew of volunteers and people who just pitched up at Dwelland Street Fire to help. I must really commend them. The public were amazing. So we did manage to minimize the damage quite a bit. It would have been substantially worse if we hadn't had swift action. But the spotting of the fire is a very problematic thing. This is where the hot embers are hoisted airborne by thermals and the wind, and then start finding new targets to ignite in terms of felt or thatch roofs, like at Rhodes Memorial and Mostert Mill, or the ivy on the outside of the university buildings. So that was a major challenge. And when we had those precautionary evacuations, when the fire was bearing down on Vredehoek and Warmer Estate, as it turned out, mercifully, those were not necessary because the fire department was able to stop those fires on that morning when the wind was so potent. Very importantly, although the fire came very close to those residential areas. That shows you that those investments made, and we were very ably assisted by the spotter plane, the Eye in the Sky, was extremely useful. We had the thermal optic a 2-seater glider plane that was giving us intel as well as the spotter plane. Those were very valuable. And I think now what remains is for us to understand how did that fire get from above Philip Gosana as a comparatively small fire to Rhodes Memorial and then to all the other damage and trouble it caused. The jobs that are lost at Rhodes Memorial, the heritage assets that were destroyed. And that forensic investigation is about 1 week away. And as soon as we have that, we will do a joint press briefing with Sandbox, as agreed with them, to help the public understand exactly what happened and also to see what lessons can be learned.
Yes, the outcome of that independent investigation is obviously crucial. But JP, it seems to me Cape Town's quite lucky to have a fire brigade that is firefighting fit, because in many parts of the country, the fire brigades are falling apart. We have heard that in Joburg, for instance, there's 1 or 2 fire trucks that's still operational. I mean, in our biggest city, our commercial centre, this is the situation. What has Cape Town done to invest in firefighting equipment, including trucks and the other technology which you referred to a moment ago?
I think the biggest difference is just the sustained investment. We understood this to be a crisis. You know, I was with Helen Zille when she was trying to become mayor in 2006, when we met with the fire department during another big wildfire inferno. She stood there with that senior staff and she said, if I become mayor, I'm going to try and reverse this budget starvation that you've been suffering. And I can say that we've kept our promise. We've had hundreds of millions of rands over the last years, since 2006, over that last decade and something, that we've invested in the fire department, a steady investment in new fire engines, water tankers, equipment and other things. In the last 2 years alone, I think around 250 million rand under Mayor Plato that we've invested in getting that fire department up with decent investments in the water tankers, which were one of our vulnerable areas, and the hydraulic platforms that allows us to get to tall buildings in our densifying city, and also to inaccessible areas and informal settlements because of their reach. So those are very valuable investments that are going to pay off in a big way over the next period. We've had a big or sustained investment in extra staff. And of course, the fully accredited training college at Epping definitely helps keep the skill levels up. I'll be the first to say we're not nearly where we want to be. There's a lot more we want to do to comply with those national SANS codes. But when we compete for budget, we are competing with roads and water and housing and electricity and other essential services. And of course, the ever-increasing investment we're having to make in policing because of the extent to which national government is under-resourcing SAPs and the crises that's causing. So we're having to make big investments, culminating in the massive financial investment in the 1,000 extra LEAP officers that we've deployed into our 10 hotspots. So
we know that
we've tried to compensate.
The ratio of citizens to police officers is extremely low in the Western Cape, and so the city has had to step into that void.
And an expensive investment to make in all those staff, and increasingly doing policing functions that shouldn't be our job. Gang and drug enforcement, before we took over, the city didn't touch that. The investments in marine enforcement, rail enforcement, liquor enforcement, these are not things that should be our competency, but you step in because you need to. And because we've made the sustained investment also in the fire department, which competes with those policing departments for resources, we're now in a position where when you speak to forensic and fire experts, they will acknowledge that Cape Town is now the most capable or able fire department left in South Africa.
Yes. As you said, things aren't ideal, far better than the rest of the country, but not ideal. What worries many people particularly is the vulnerability of people living in informal settlements to fires. So wildfires in Cape Town, it comes with the weather and the geography, but people living in informal settlements or homeless people are particularly vulnerable to this phenomenon. What is your track record in making sure that we can fight the fires in informal settlements, get the fire trucks into narrow streets and so forth, but also prevent fires from happening in informal settlements?
Absolutely. I mean, the story of fire is covered during summer in our so-called fire season with the fires on the mountain. But there is another fire season emerging right now, which as it gets colder, people are using galley stoves and galley bins and other mechanisms, lanterns, candles, and open fire to heat and for illumination and cooking in informal settlements. So you can't tell the story of fire without talking about the crisis that faces backyarders and informal settlement owners. When I became portfolio chair in 2006, our death rate to fire in backyards and informal settlements was around 7.9 per 100,000. So 8 people out of every 100,000. That's a terrible story. We have managed to get that figure to below 3.6 per 100,000, and that's been through the sustained investment we've done. And remember, you achieve that figure despite the rising land invasions. We have a situation where in this last year, because of the South African Human Rights Commission's court interdict and because of the lockdown regulations that prevent the city from removing structures in open areas, in informal settlements, in vulnerable green belts and off-city sidewalks, because we are prohibited from doing that, that situation has aggravated our fire risk very substantially, as demonstrated by this big inferno on the mountain this last week, if the suspicion around the cause of the fire proves to be accurate. So that has created a much worse risk scenario for us. But the sustained investment we've made in staff that I've already mentioned and equipment has helped. And of course, you have to address the legacy of where your investments were made in the past. The old municipalities that Cape Town consists of did not make investments other than the old leafy suburbs. So your fire stations are along your main northern and southern suburbs corridors and some other places, a few other places, but there have been gaps. We've closed those gaps. For instance, in the last year and something alone, with the new Masiphumelele fire station between Ocean View and Masiphumelele, and the new one serving Solaris Pass Village, Nomzamo and Lwandle. So service gaps where our response time is slow because of the proximity of the nearest station. We've addressed Langa is about to get a fire station, which will allow us to turn Epping into a proper training facility. These investments are very important. Also, the 420 disaster management volunteers, they play a critical role with their skid units to augment our fire capacity. We're very proud of them. And they definitely make a big support, or they add a big support. Because remember, during fires, you cannot, in informal settlements, do aerial firefighting with choppers. You can't water bomb informal structures with tons of water where you've got electrical wiring and other stuff. So people don't understand that. They often say, where's the fire for the informal settlement? You can't use choppers under those circumstances, except on the very periphery. So we've made a very big investment in preventative measures, but probably the most powerful one is just the constant education and awareness. You don't just suddenly arrive at the fire and think you've done enough. Throughout the year, we do 800 to 900 awareness sessions in our most vulnerable communities for everything from old age homes to schools to particularly informal settlements, the constant messaging through disaster management and the fire department. Those are very important investments. We've worked very hard to service and to improve the fate of all of our communities, especially the most vulnerable ones in backyards and informal settlements. And one of the issues that we've even had to tackle is SASSA. At the moment, the humanitarian relief measures for victims of fire after a fire used to be done by disaster management on SASSA's behalf. SASSA have recovered that function, and that has now made it difficult for us to get humanitarian relief to people in the manner that they've become accustomed to, and that we think is reasonable. So we've engaged with them also through the provincial minister, and I think we've arrived at the realization that we are going to have to recover that capacity ourselves. We're trying to find creative ways to do that without breaking the budget, because as with the policing situation, these investments need to be made as unfunded mandates. They're not things for which the local government is compensated for doing a function of national government.
And the irony there is that a city like Cape Town, which does well, ends up having to carry a lot of the responsibility of national government. That's a strange thing about politics. But
we've seen that on every level. You've seen it on water, where we've had to roll out water augmentation strategies. You've seen it in electricity. You see it in policing. There are more and more areas where we have to step up and prop up the failing services and competencies of national government. And this adds to our rates burden. You start having to make decisions about where do you neglect your core business, the less sexy stuff that people are not worried about, because when you go to a public meeting, the public are asking you, what are you doing about this and that issue? And the majority of the times you're having those arguments, it is about national competencies that are failing, and where you have to start being creative about how you step into that gap. But on the informal settlements, we've used everything from reblocking after a fire or even before a fire to engineering solutions with all kinds of measures. We've tested emergency preparedness training for communities, education, enforcement, everything we can do to try and bring down that risk and the exposure to fire losses for those communities. Most often people under those circumstances, almost always, they won't be insured. What they lose, what possessions they lose permanently.
Well, they have, yeah. But I think the hopeful message is that a good, strong city government or local government can help protect its people from the failures at national level. And I think Cape Town is a very good example of that. So thanks very much, JP, for coming in. Our hearts go out to the people affected by these devastating fires in Cape Town, people who lost property, jobs, people who were displaced, including students. And we hope that if this happens again, everybody will be better prepared. Nonetheless, we are thankful for the men and women who risk their own lives to protect people and property against these devastating fires, including your team, JP. We'll be back right after this. And that's a wrap, South Africa. We must put a stop to the corrupt policy of cadre deployment. South Africa's future depends on it. Visit outlawcadredeployment.co.za to make your voice heard. And remember to visit check.da.org.za so that when elections happen on 27 October this year, you are ready to vote for change. Until next time, Stay strong, South Africa.